Connections.
We're live on Facebook. We will wait, make sure we get our Instagram going, get my special guest going, and we're going to have a big update for everybody today. Thanks for joining, everybody. We're going to get started. Before I bring on my special guest, today's conversation is going to be about this bill that Governor DeSantis signed just today, just an hour or two ago. And then hopefully we can get some information and debunk some of this. So give me 1 second, make sure we're good on Instagram, and we'll get started. Okay. All right. Again, my name is Naif Mubarak from Mubarak Law in downtown Orlando, and we're going to get started. So this bill, many of you have called us, asked us, and rightfully so. It is very intimidating, scary, and there's a lot of myths out there. So we're going to try to answer those with you. So because of the certain criminality and certain things in here that are really scaring people about going to jail and other issues, I thought it would be wonderful to have not only a super nice guy, but one of the most experienced criminal defense attorneys in town in Central Florida, who has represented people at the federal level, local level, and all throughout the state of Florida. My former law partner, Mr. Joshi. You have seen him on CNN, Dr. Phil, and without further ado, probably your local gym somewhere lifting weights. Mr. Rajan Joshi, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. Rajan, I think your microphone with your phone is probably not going to work. So we're going to end that one. Okay. So if you can end your Instagram for me. Okay. But yeah, Rajan, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And so thank you. I know that this bill is kind of overlapping my area of immigration and your area of criminal, which happens all the time. And that we need to kind of discuss this bill and give people some peace of mind or how to properly prepare. So, but first, tell me, how are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. It's a pleasure being back on your podcast. You do an amazing job on all the cases I refer to you and all the cases I've seen you do over the years. And, always enjoyed working with you.
Likewise. I know in your introduction, I mentioned, some of your big TV shows and things you've been on, but Rajan has over 80 trials, probably close to 100 trials, which is not common, believe it or not, for criminal defense lawyers. Most people are pleading things out, so he is not afraid to go to trial, and he's always doing outstanding results. And I think if his clients are up for it, then he is definitely up to going for trial. And that's what people need to know about their attorneys when they're handling such sensitive matters. So, Rajan, this bill, SB1718, when we announced this live today, it was just signed by the Florida Senate, and it is now it has been signed actually by Governor DeSantis. So it's essentially Florida law now. And so this is a timely thing for our podcast. And we've been seeing so many different things coming out on TikTok and TikTok lawyers and everything else giving people, worrisome information. So let's talk about this step by step. And again, this is going to be our opinion. We are just trying our best to interpret based on experience and based on what little information we have. We hope that there will be additional memos or legal challenges to this so that we will have more information to present for you. So we understand that many of you watching have family members and this is going to affect and are scared. But again, today we're just doing this based on the little information we have in our interpretation of what we see here. So first, one of the biggest issues we see here, Rajan, and I want to jump into this because it has the criminal element of it, is trafficking or transporting undocumented people in the country. So we've received questions like, if I drive an Uber in the state of Florida, how am I supposed to know what the other person's status is? Am I going to be in trouble for that? It looks like this might have derived from some of the earlier versions of the bill. But what do you think about that particular question and this transporting out of status people?
Well, as the bill is written, it seems like people who are undocumented or who aren't here, didn't enter in legally, if they are being transported into the state by somebody, and they don't even have to know about their status, just know or reasonably should know. And that's where the law has some issues with, because it doesn't have an intent element necessarily. You either could know or you reasonably should have known, and who's to say what reasonably should have known is? It leaves it up to the discretion of the police officer, saying, oh, you should have known they have accents or the way they look, that they were undocumented. People don't normally ask, for a person's papers, but it only applies if you're bringing them into the state.
Right.
If you bring in a single person and they're an adult, it's a third-degree felony, punishable up to 5 years in prison. If it's a minor, then you're looking at a second-degree felony. And the risk of that is somebody takes their friend and their 16-year-old son to a concert in Georgia and is coming back, gets pulled over for speeding. Turns out these people are undocumented, and the police officer says, well, you should know by the way they look or by the way they dress. That person could be looking at a second and third degree felony. And, I think it allows police officers to detain minorities and start investigating based on their accent, the way they look, to determine
that racial profiling. And it did seems to be that the final version of the bill specifically mentions like into Florida. So I'm wondering, how is that going to be interpreted by law enforcement? Is this going to be something that is really strict at the state borders with Alabama and Georgia, or can they apply this, this law in other places like Orlando, where we're, 4 or 5 hours from the state lines? Where are they going to draw the line? So I think for people who are asking, like, can I transport my kid to school? Maybe I'm overly optimistic. I don't think that this will apply to them, right? Again, my interpretation of this is for people being crossing state lines. But again, it's going to be that, when do we draw the line? Where are they going to draw the line? And that's stuff that usually gets fleshed out with case law and with memorandum and things that's early on. So what are your thoughts on that? Are they going to be in throughout the state or closer to the border? Or how do you read this statute?
Well, the statute doesn't have any provisions on, checks of the law enforcement. So technically, they could be in the middle of Orlando, and the law enforcement officer can be questioning the driver, where are you coming from? Where these people, how'd these people get in your car? Did you come from? And so it can start investigations. There's no limitation that it has to be at the border or where it's from. And, it could be, on the border of, the ocean, just saying, hey, did you bring them into the state? Anytime a law enforcement officer thinks that they were brought into the state, it can start an investigation. My, what I'm concerned is just law enforcement using this as a means to detain and investigate minorities.
Right. Which, of course, there's a lot of really good cops out there who are just trying to enforce the law. And then we always have sometimes bad apples who might be racial profiling, whether it's a Black individual, Latino individual, Arabs. It's nothing new. And I know that you're big on con law and always advocating for these things. So it makes sense to me why that is something that is sticking out to you.
Another issue I got with this law, which I think it is subject to being challenged, not just the fact that it has, a person should reasonably know, is usually this type of enforcement is handled at the federal level. And it's kind of like the state now is trying to enforce federal laws. And so that there could be a challenge over there with the supremacy clause. And
I agree. So there is a lot of overlap. The state has the right to enforce and their state laws, and then we have the federal government and the executive branch and supposed to enforcing immigration laws. So I think there is going to be constitutionality challenges coming from that. But I do want to say, I've had many clients calling me very worried and concerned, like, if I'm pulled over, am I going to be deported by, Hillsborough County Sheriff? No. So yes, it might create criminal charges and things like that, but there's not going to be an immigration deportation from the state of Florida. That's not what's going to happen. And that's Also, in very few circumstances, when you already have a deportation order or subject to an order of removal, can immigration agents then remove you without having due process or a court or judge. But for most people, it's a lengthy process where you have the right to see a judge and things. So I do try to tell people that, because I understand they are often concerned about, am I going to be put on a plane and sent away and never seen my family again? And hopefully that's not the case, and very rarely it is. So yeah, there is some overlap there with the constitutionality of it. Now, with the driving subject, I'm going to just kind of switch to driver's licenses, right? And so you cannot drive, or you should not be driving unless you have with somebody who's undocumented, who entered the country. And specifically, we should notate that this is for people who entered the country unlawfully. The way that the statute was written, the Florida statute, is talking about, it's not talking about people who are visa overstays or things like that, or a student visa overstay. So for a big group of people, this does not even apply to you. You might have crossed the border 20 years ago, and perhaps this applies to you, being, the person driving you cannot drive you into the state of Florida. But for visa overstays, the way that's written, that's not you. So hopefully for many of you watching, this is some kind of form of relief, that if you are a visa overstay or you're pending a process, being transported is not something that should apply to you. Now, again, I say should because we don't know what type of training these officers are going to receive. Are they going to receive, certifications in the background of immigration where they're not typically familiar with some of these nuanced details? Now, besides the transporting individuals, let's talk about driver's licenses. First of all, since the Real ID Act, Florida is one of the toughest places to get a driver's license if you don't have the proper documentation. So this new bill specifically has provisions talking about out-of-state driver's license, where normally we would accept an out-of-state driver's license to be used in Florida. What can you tell me about this part of the bill and driving without a license? Are you going to be charged? Is your license valid here? Let's talk about this one for a second.
Well, what happens is, if somebody has a driver's license in another state, it's recognized in all 50 states. So if I have a Alabama license, I come to Florida, I can drive temporarily on that Alabama license. What the law does is says that people who are undocumented, if they have a license from a state such as New York or California, which does provide driver's licenses, Florida will not recognize it, and they can be charged and arrested for driving with no driver's license in the state of Florida if they're driving. And a lot of out-of-state immigrants aren't going to know the law, so they come here to go to Disney and they get pulled over. They have a valid driver's license from another state, but in Florida, they've crossed over the lines. They're looking at going to jail, being charged with a misdemeanor, but still, they had no intent and thought they were validly driving.
Okay, so now, what state is there going to be a difference between your out-of-state driver's license versus your in-state one? I'm not sure if you specified the differences between, like, if I have a New York driver's license.
If you have a New York driver's license, you can come into Florida under normal circumstances and drive. You're welcome to drive in Florida. Your out-of-state license can be recognized temporarily while you're here if you're not residing over here. However, for those undocumented immigrants who are entitled to get a license from another state, Florida is not going to recognize those licenses if they're caught driving in Florida, and it'll be a crime.
Okay, so just to reiterate, if you can't hear me or Attorney Joshi on the Instagram, what I'm saying is, for those driver's license obtained through necessary documentation of proving lawful status, like a pending adjustment of status or asylum status, those are not going to be considered invalid. It's only for states that have created avenues or license specific to those people who have no status whatsoever or no application pending. So that is an important detail. Again, this is a scary bill. It's a bad bill. I'm not saying this is any good by any means. He's bad bill, right? However, if we look at the details of it, there's going to be some things that I could alleviate. Okay, well, this particular group is not affected. This particular group is not affected. How can we, try to alleviate some of the stress that many of you are going through? And that's hopefully what we're trying to do here. I can't see my comments on Facebook, but if you have questions, I'll get to those later and try to address them. You have my word on that. And again, this is Attorney Joshi and I's just opinions and speculation on the matter. We wish we had a crystal ball We would be looking at lottery numbers and things, but we don't know what's going to be the outcome of this. So another issue, which at first I found very alarming, was the hospitals and the requirement that hospitals' questionnaires or intakes forms have specific questions regarding somebody's immigration status. And what we don't want to happen is people being fearful of getting treatment because of their status. The last thing we want is somebody sick or dying and then avoiding treatment because of the fact they don't want to tell the hospital their situation. And this is, very alarming. Although the questions will be asked, it doesn't seem to be like it's a requirement in order to seek treatment. I guess that's going to depend from hospital to hospital. But it also does state, I will say this is some good news, some silver lining in this particular portion. It does state that, I can't see my comments. See, all right, I figured it out. You're not old. You're not old yet, Naif. So what it is saying back to the hospitals is that they're not going to report to the federal immigration agencies about that. So this is a relief for me. Is it intrusive? Is it unnecessary? What does it matter? The intention behind this portion is to see how many people are actually using state benefits. Many state benefits are not available for people with no status. So I guess we'll actually see. Maybe this will help demonstrate to those that, undocumented are not using too many resources. Somebody has some question here. Yes, Mr. Benjamin, we are taking questions. Thank you. And then Ms. Farah has approved I-130, waiting for a waiver. Is he affected by this bill? Again, so this bill is talking specifically about driver's license and transporting people who are completely undocumented. In that situation, if you have a pending adjustment case, I don't think that this is an issue that you have to worry about, especially with the driver's license, because now if you're waiting for a waiver because of the manner of entry, right, then you might all of a sudden be subject to transporting portion of this bill. And we want to, I mind you, this is a public forum. Any comments and things can be seen by other people, Andre, can be seen by other people. So please try to keep your personal questions not so detailed about specifics of who it's for, just for your own good. All right. So unauthorized employment is another thing that we see on this bill. I mentioned to Attorney Joshi earlier before we started this call that a lot of this seems to be like old bill or old language. It is not necessarily something that used to be enforced, but perhaps being vamped up maybe for the fact that they intend to do so later. Rajan, what did you see under the employment verification or work issues that you might see your area of law come in and overlap on?
Well, it does make it a felony for someone to use false documentation to get work over here, to use fraudulent documents, which is nothing new. I mean, it's just, committing fraud right there. So the bill does add it in to this. If you're seeking employment and you use, false work authorization, it's going to be a felony, which that is, has been a crime all around. So it's nothing new is affected by that.
Yeah, and then so some people are asking questions here about E-Verify and working. So E-Verify is a system regarding, it's a federal system where you have to submit specific documents, or they try to verify if you're authorized to work. What Rajan is saying too is what's changed here, right? So yeah, fraudulent documents, of course, that's going to be a criminal issue. But this also goes one step further and is saying that private companies with 25 or more employees in Florida are now required to use E-Verify system. And this E-Verify system wasn't necessarily required or mandated before by the state of Florida, but now they're saying it is. And then anybody, I guess, regardless of the number of employees you have, it's never been legal to employ somebody without authorization status. So that's, that's nothing new, right? This hasn't been rampant. This isn't something that we've been getting by with. It's never been legal. So let's be clear on that. But now what they're saying is that they're going to do violations that may suspend businesses' licenses or permits, allowing them to do certain activity if they have continued violations of this. Now, what's going to be affected, in Florida, Rajan? What kind of major companies are we seeing in our state that we know are probably going to be greatly affected by this issue, where we might have even greater shortages or greater supply chain issues because of the lack of employees?
A lot of it's going to be, more of the labor pool, because there's certain jobs that people who have work authorization don't want to do, and the companies, the construction companies or other labor companies will hire undocumented aliens to do the work, because right now minimum wage has gone up so much that people can find employment in other areas. And not have to do these jobs. So what's going to happen is these employers are going to be are going to shy away from hiring the people they normally would have hired and keeping the cost low to their customers. So what's going to happen is they're going to have a shortage of workers, because a lot of people with work authorization don't want to do that kind of work. And the ones that they will hire, they will charge higher wages. So the costs are going to go back to the consumer. So maybe purchasing or building a house may be even more expensive.
And just like the construction workers building all these projects going around, it's an industry that's really known to kind of have undocumented or migrant workers who are going through their process. And so if these construction sites are being targeted, which they typically are, usually targeted by certain ICE agencies and things, because of the fact that there tends to be a high number, this is something that might affect those companies. And then we're going to have more issues with labor. And, in Florida, in addition to construction, like we have in Miami, Orlando, one of the fastest growing states in our country, we also have huge agriculture, right? So picking of these oranges, picking of these fruits and these things, what kind of repercussions would these employers see? And then how is that going to trickle down to the rest of the state of Florida and the costs and families, and for people who are, either hardworking or doing so and helping things go out? We got another question. Can you be arrested if you're driving with someone who has status pending but doesn't have their documents? So that question, again, I know that this driver's license question is huge. It depends, right? Your famous lawyer answer is that it depends. How did that person enter the country, and what phase are they in? If they are in a marriage-based case and they entered on a tourist visa, as the law is written, this should not be a crime for the person driving. Now, as we see, and I'm sure Rajan sees all the time, is sometimes officers are not trained on every little detail, especially when something comes down. And if it's going to just come without sufficient training, then they might not know the difference. So although our opinion interpretation is one thing, we have to understand that the implementation and the way it's put in practice is not always going to be right. So
and you're right. The state law enforcement may not understand the complexity of immigration law, which is complex, and it is there is a difference between somebody being out of status and entering illegally. So we're going to be trusting these law enforcement officers to know the distinction and not make an arrest in such a situation.
Right. And so we hope that's the case. I know that our law enforcement officers, anybody watching, we do thank you for your service. We know it's not an easy job. Absolutely. We know you're overburdened, and there are issues with training and resources, right? So we have now added this huge, massive bill to law enforcement to say, do this, and let's see what kind of training is going to take place. So I know this bill is huge, and people are asking us a lot of questions about it. A couple of other highlights for me this is just interesting. So there's a lot of lawyers in the state of Florida that actually have DACA, right? The dreamers, and these are people who have worked hard. They followed the law. They have passed the bar to help, be members of the bar. And because of their status, would not be eligible to practice law in the state of Florida. Remember, like these dreamers, a lot of them came to the U.S. as minors and through their family, and a lot of time at the time they were infants. And so this is saying that if you have your license before the expiration, it does give an expiration date, I believe, till 2028. But anybody after that, if this law is still around, will no longer be eligible to become a lawyer. And, these are people, again, who have already been approved for work authorization. They don't have major criminal history. And if they did, they probably wouldn't be admitted to our bar. So this is something that I find, one thing that I find that it's really hard to justify here, that it's just kind of mean. What is the issue with that? And I don't know if you have any opinion on that, Rajan. And I know we all come from immigrant backgrounds, and what's the USA, right? So if you're not from a Native American tribe, you're an immigrant. So what is your thought about this portion?
I think this part is very arbitrary, and there's no justification. It's not going to protect our legal profession by keeping these people out, who in every other aspect, are the same as people who've lived here and are here legally, but through no fault of their own. They were brought here as kids, and fortunately, the law does give that grace period up until November 1st, 2028. So people who are in law school right now, or who have ambitions to being a lawyer, do have the opportunity. But once that expiration date comes, then it's like you're out of luck. And some of these people could end up being phenomenal attorneys. There's nothing saying that these people are not otherwise equipped to be lawyers.
Right. They've passed the same test. They've passed everything. They're doing what they can. And this is kind of like we both, I think, agree on this. And this is a very arbitrary portion of the bill. Now, there are concerns about saying, well, how is this going to be reported to ICE agents? Well, in Florida, in many counties, if you're arrested and you're not a citizen, ICE is typically notified. This isn't anything new. One thing new is being submitted to the DNA database. If you have an ICE detainer, which could be fingerprinting, swabs, and things like that, which is pretty typical when you are arrested. I think Rajan can attest to that.
Most people everyone who's arrested and taken in, gets the fingerprints rolled, and with felons they do swab, for DNA, and so it's not really intrusive, but it is just another layer of element to kind of make. I think what they're trying to do is give a shock and awe with this bill.
Yeah. Right, I agree. So for me, this is a lot of political posturing by Governor DeSantis and the Republican Party. They like to take a hard line on immigration, but many of the portions of this bill is old law that they are kind of updating. Mm-hmm. Now, I hope I am correct and I'm not wrong, but in the past we've seen them enforce bills or sign bills, and then never really and it comes of it. And then you do have the component that the ICE agents and the federal agencies then have to be kind of on board with such kind of enforcement. So we might see more tussles, more political back and forth as to, no, we're not going to do this, and no, we're not going to do that. Somebody asked another question asking if it's completely different for somebody who crossed the border and somebody who's a visa overstay. And our reading is yes, for the purpose of for transporting an undocumented person. Now, the driver's license, like the thing it's hard to answer that question is that there are so many different portions of this bill. For example, the hospital asks for your status in general, right? And the driver's license is, well, how did you get the driver's license? So there is no blanket answer to this, unfortunately. I do want to thank Rajan for taking the time with us today. He is an awesome friend and attorney, and I feel very confident to send some of our clients on, if they get into some trouble, his firm's website, joshilaw.com, also his social media and our social medias. We have just frequently asked questions, and I know I received so many questions, and we're going to try to answer it and put a page up and send it out to you. So if you found this helpful, please share it with your friends and family, and like us. And to Ms. Torres, thank you for joining us today. And one more time, I'd like to thank Rajan and everybody else who joined us. I hope you found this helpful. And we'll be more. And then there's just some good news. We'll end on some good news notes. We have been doing some electronic filings where we have gotten same-day approvals on work permits for pending asylums. So, while pendulum is swinging back and forth, depending on some other things, there's always good news. And like we kind of dissected this bill, there's some silver lining. Try not to go down the rabbit hole of all the bad stuff that's out there on this bill, because a lot of it might not be true. But hopefully we would see you all soon. And thanks again, Rajan. I hope everyone has a great night.
Having you. Always a pleasure.
All right, bye-bye.